Bonjour and good afternoon. Welcome to WASA Distance Education Center and PLAR Science. So we're into the last class of PLAR Science for this week. So after today's class, we have two more classes next week, which is week 9. Also, another announcement, graduation is on a Tuesday, June 18th. So a reminder to students or people who are interested in attending the WASA graduation. It will be at the Legion, and it starts at 1:30. Okay, that is for the graduation. Students who are wanting to apply for the summer term, which is term 3, and that's 9 weeks, June 24th to August 23rd. You can apply by using the WASA application form. We also have an electronic application form that we have been sharing on our Facebook post, and you can also request for it by email. All you need is an email address to put in there. So once you go to the WASA sign up, it will ask for an email, and then you can go ahead and try to put in the information that you need to apply. Students who are currently registered either for Zoom or Radio Zoom or independent learning, remember that you must complete your course on or before June 13th, 2024. The Term 2B draws will be happening at the end of Term 2B. Remember, we have 2 student draws, one for students who earned credit and one for students who submit work. So if you have been submitting work and you also earn a credit, then your chances increases. So the summer term courses, as I've mentioned before, under the English courses, you have NBE 3C, ENG 3E and 4E, ENG 4C. So you have one for Workplace English, grade 11-12, that's the 3E, 4E. The grade 12 College English, that's the ENG 4C. We also offer the grade 12 University English, the 4U, and of course the Ontario Secondary Literacy course, OLC 4O. Under the math, we have grade 11 Workplace, MEL3E, grade 11 College Math, the Personal Finance, MBF 3C, the grade 12 College Math Foundations, the MAP 4C, and grade 12 College Math Technology, MCT 4C. Under the sciences, we have the grade 10 Science, we have the grade 11 Workplace Environmental Science, we have the grade 11 College Biology, and the grade 12 College Chemistry, and the grade 12 University Biology. For history, we have 2 offerings there, the CHC2P, which is the grade 10 Applied, and the NBV3E, which is the Workplace Native Studies. And we also offer DCO3O, which is the Cooperative Education. Just a reminder, if you need to get a hold of me, you can call me at the office. We have the toll-free number. My extension is 2204. You can also fax the office. You can email me. You can contact me through Facebook Messenger, J. Mercer Wasa. That's my work Facebook. Again, the office hour schedule that's available from your DEC, or you can call the office. You can also call me at home. Options to submit your key questions. Make sure you send it, if you're emailing it, to send it to studentwork@nnec.on.ca and then CC it to the teacher that's marking your work. You can also have it faxed. You can use your notes app, and then you can scan email it yourself. You can send a picture through Messenger, or you can drop it off at our WASA office. 2 ways: you just knock on our door, or you can also put it in our outdoor mailbox on the side entrance. Make sure you put your name on your work. Speaking of work, make sure that when you're submitting your work, You can submit them as you complete them, and that just means that you don't have to complete, for example, for PLAR Science, you don't have to complete all all 5 lessons of PLAR Science. You can submit them as you're completing them. And of course, make sure that you're contacting your teacher if you're needing any help with the key questions. Additional support, you can watch our classes on YouTube. So that's for all the PLAR. All the PLAR packages are the same whether you registered in Radio Zoom or if you registered through IL. And PLAR students may continue where you left off. If you're not sure, make sure you contact one of us. So if you go to my profile on YouTube, you will see that I have 4 groups of classes under playlist. The PLAR Science 2B 2024, that's where I'm putting in the classes that we're doing right now. The PLAR Geography 2A and the PLAR History 2A, that was from the 2A term. So if you're working on those, you can check those out. Or if you're working ahead in PLAR Science, then you can go to the PLAR Science 1B. If you don't want to do that, you can request a USB of classes and we'll just mail these out to you, or you can pick them up. And again, these classes can be viewed on your laptop, television, Xbox, or PlayStation. You just need a USB port to insert the flash drive. And it's organized by subject, so in this case it's PLAR Science. By lesson, it'll tell you the lesson number, and then by key questions. So for example, this one says PLAR Science Lesson 3, key questions 41 to 44. Okay, so it's already, like I said, week 8. Now on your guide, it shows week 8 is lesson 4 physics. We have started lesson 5, and then next week we will continue with the rest of lesson 5, and we will get a chance to look at the culminating activity for PLAR Science. Remember, you cannot get your equivalent credit unless you complete the culminating. Some of you already have the culminating activity. Make sure that you return them to me. Remember, you need 50% to pass. Either myself or your DEC will give you the culminating activity if you don't have it. And as I said, equivalent credits are granted to students based on individual assessments. So that means you have to do that if you need PLAR Science. Okay, this afternoon we are in lesson 5, so if you have this sheet, that means you have sent in some key questions already. You did 26 key questions in lesson 1, then you completed lesson 2 biology, and that means that you have completed 14 key questions, 27 to 40. Then lesson 3 chemistry, we had key questions 41 to 63, so that's the longest, sorry, not the longest, the second longest one after lesson 1. There's 24 key questions. Lesson 4 physics, that one is the shortest one there. It has 8 key questions, and then finally lesson 5, you only have to do 9 key questions, and then you can do the culminating. Okay, so let's look at learning goals for lesson 5. I can describe the different components of an ecosystem, and I can explain the dangers of global warming. So a quick review here, we looked at on Monday. We said, what is environmental science? Well, it's an interdisciplinary study of basically how the earth works, how we interact with the earth, and how do we deal with environmental problems. So for example, it could be, how do we deal with pollution? Okay, that's an environmental problem. So environmental science is the study of living organisms and how they interact with our environment. We also looked at another terminology, ecologist. They study the relationship between living things and where they live, or their habitats. And ecosystem, that is made up of all the living. So when we talk about living, we mean biotic, and non-living means, non-living things, abiotic, in an area. So this includes all of the plants, animals, and other living things that make up the communities of life in an area. So when we talk about an ecosystem, this includes non-living materials. So for example, water, rocks, soil, and sand. You can also be talking about a swamp, a prairie, an ocean, or a forest. Okay, these are examples of ecosystems. So a quick review here. We have biotic. So remember, biotic makes up all the living things. And I just noticed something here. In this picture, it says biotic refers to living organisms or factors in an ecosystem. Okay, but the pictures need to be switched. So the pictures of the water, soil, air, minerals, and light, that should say abiotic. And then this one should say biotic, and the pictures there are plants, animals, bacteria, fungus, protist. And it was such a nice picture too. But I just noticed that whoever did that had the pictures mixed up. Okay, so let's look at page, continuing from where we left off on Monday, biotic components. So the living things, I said, that shape an ecosystem are known as biotic components. So this would include organisms, their presence, parts, interaction, and waste. So factors such as parasitism, disease, and predation, and that just means one animal eating another, would also be classified as biotic factors. Okay, we see these, whether living things such as plants and animals, these are all part of an ecosystem. There are different categories of biotic components. So remember, biotic, living, including producers. So producers, also known as autotrophs, they make food through photosynthesis. Okay, so plants is an example. They convert the light energy from the sun into food. Okay, the next one is consumers, or if you want to refer to them as heterotrophs. Hetero meaning others, and troph means nutrition, meaning they need other animals, or they need the producers to give them food, okay? Because they cannot make their own food, they must eat other living organisms. So you have a couple of pictures there. So again, hetero means others, they need others to provide them food. Finally, there are decomposers or detritivores, probably easier to say decomposers. An example would be fungi and bacteria break down chemicals from dead animals and plants into simpler forms that can be reused. So decomposers, they eat dead stuff, whether it's dead plants, dead animals, or animal waste. There are many types. Could be bacteria, fungi, animals, for example, insects or worms. Most thrive in warm, moist environments. So if we look at the food chain, which we will look at in a couple of pages here, it shows you the producer. We already talked about that. So they make the food. Then you have consumers, so eating other living organisms because they can't make their own food. So as you look at the food chain here, you have the mouse, then you have snakes, and then you have that looks like a hawk, and then at the bottom you have the decomposers. Okay, next up are abiotic components. So these are the non-living chemical and physical parts of an ecosystem. So these parts of an ecosystem can affect the size of animal and plant populations and their ability to grow and reproduce. So meaning, how do they affect the size of an animal or plant populations? Well, depending on the availability of water or light, for example, or presence of chemical pollutants, this could affect plants or crops. So that's what we mean by that. So when you look at abiotic factors, the word A in front of biotic means not, and biotic means living, so non-living things if you put abiotic. So these factors help determine whether a species can survive in an area. And like I said, sunlight affects whether a plant can grow. So abiotic factors will vary in the environment and determining the types and numbers of organisms that exist in that environment. So factors that determine the types and numbers of organisms of a species in an ecosystem are what's called limiting factors. So many limiting factors prevent or restrict the growth of populations in nature. So an example would be the low annual average temperature common to the Arctic restricts the growth of trees. And the reason for that is the subsoil is permanently frozen. Okay, so that's a limiting factor. Another term is carrying capacity. Now, the carrying capacity is the maximum number of organisms the resources of an ecosystem can support. If you look at the fishbowl that's on the screen here, you can see one fishbowl is just too full. Okay, it's full of fish. So that means that there's just too many in there. It's overflowing, there's not enough water, there's not enough room. And then you have the fishbowl on the right where you have about 3 fish in there. So the carrying capacity of the environment is limited by the available abiotic and biotic resources, so limiting factors, as well as the ability of ecosystems to recycle the residue of dead organisms through the activities of bacteria and fungi. Okay, another useful information is the number of predators and prey that can live in an area. So if you have too many predators, okay, and not enough prey, then that means that it would lead to predators starving and dying because they can't find enough food. Okay, let's look at relationships between organisms. How do they interact? Well, organisms do not live in isolations. Organisms usually group with others of the same species. That means all the members of the same species living in the same ecosystem or habitat are referred to as a population. So for example, all of the frogs in a pond are a population. So if you have one frog, that's an organism, but when you have a group of frogs, then you have your population. They're all living in that same area. Because there's almost always more than one species in an ecosystem, there's also more than one population. Okay, not only frogs, but you might have mosquitoes in there, ducks, dragonflies, different plants, snails, fish, and so on. So the collection of all of the populations of all the species in an ecosystem or habitat is what you refer to as community of organisms. So the community of organisms that we have here on the screen, we have the frogs, the toad, mosquitoes, algae, and among others. Now, due to their proximity, meaning their closeness, these populations interact. So they may interact beneficially, or they may be competitive. So for example, mosquitoes will eat the flies. The ducks may eat some of the plants there. So if there's other animals there that need to eat the plants, then now they're competing. So some of these relationships include producer-consumer. They could be predator or prey. They could be parasite or host relationships. Other organism interactions include those in which one organism may cause disease in, scavenge, or decompose another. But before we look at the complex relationships of organisms, let's look at the basis for any organism relationship, which is food. Okay, that's one of the important things for organisms to survive, is they need nutrition or food to eat. So let's look at the food chains and food webs. So the first one is a food chain. And a food chain is basically a step-by-step sequence linking organisms that feed each other, starting with a food source such as plants, meaning producers, and continuing with animals and other living things that feed on the plants and on each other, or consumers. Okay, so let's look at the food chain here. You have a food chain showing one path and how energy moves through an ecosystem. So simplest way to look at it is who eats who. So you have on this food chain, you have grass, then you have the grasshopper. So grasshopper eats grass. Then you have the mouse. So the mouse eats the grasshopper. And then you have the owl. So if you look at that food chain, that's the sequence of who eats who. So you have the owl who can eat the mouse eats the grasshopper eats grass. Then you have the food web, and a food web consists of many food chains, and it shows all of the interconnections between organisms. On the food web, you can see many different paths whereby animals and plants are connected to each other. Also, food webs show how plants and animals are connected in many ways to help them all survive. As I've said, in the food chain, you're just looking at one path of energy as animals find food. So on the food web, we have the owl, we also have a fox, we have the mouse, we have a deer, and that's a chipmunk. You have a rabbit, you have the grasshopper, and you also have bird. And you have that looks like an eagle. And then you also have a tree. So you can see the food, so the food web. So if you look at the rabbit, for example, well, the rabbit needs grass, so the rabbit can eat that. Meanwhile, the fox can also eat the rabbit, so can the owl. And then the owl can also eat the chipmunk. The deer eats the grass. Let's see who may eat the deer. Oh, the deer can also eat. That looks like some sort of insect. Okay, the chipmunk also relies on the tree. So the more lines you see, or the more web you see, then you can tell how each of these predator or prey interacts with the other producers or consumers. Okay, another term that we're looking at is what's known as an ecotone, and another one is biodiversity. So as ecosystems rarely have sharp boundaries, and organisms can move back and forth from one ecosystem to another. So for example, a lake is an ecosystem, a forest is an ecosystem. There's often a gray area between ecosystems where organisms from both ecosystems interact with one another. So these transition areas, so when you think about them, it's kind of like a border, are called ecotones. So ecotones contain a greater biodiversity, meaning the greater the biodiversity in ecosystem, the less fragile it tends to be. So here's an example. There's the mangrove tree, and the mangrove tree, the prop roots grow in the water. Okay, so that's in the ocean. So the fish hide in the prop roots during the day to escape predation. Okay, so that's where the fish are hiding, so that, whichever organisms are trying to get them, they can hide there. So the ecotone is the boundary. Now at night, they venture out to nearby seagrass beds to feed. Okay, so you can see here that the ecotones are boundaries between two different ecosystems. Some edge species require resources provided by both ecosystems to survive. Okay, and that's an example of the fish up there. So what are the features of ecotones? Well, ecotones are of interest to ecologists because they are not only a physical transition from one ecozone to another, but they also represent a transition in the living conditions, both in habitats and niche. So along this ecotone, organisms from both communities face increasing environmental stress. So here you can see the species overlapping in ecotones. A good example is a deer, which is a terrestrial animal. They can't survive in a region with damp marshlands. So that's the ecotone between terrestrial, which is the land, and aquatic ecosystem, which is water. So the same deer will also struggle to survive near the ecotone where a forest and grassland meet, since there aren't enough open spaces, meaning that they can't keep a lookout for predators as effectively as it can in open grasslands. Okay, they can't see their predator, as well as if it was in an open grassland. So here you have the species overlapping in ecotones. So you have the land zone. An example there would be deer, snakes, squirrels. And then transition zone, you have like frogs, ducks, dragonflies. And as you get closer to the aquatic zone, now you have frogs, fish, and what else is that one over there? Oh, ducks or geese. Okay, so let's look at some key questions. Now, the key questions for lesson 5, like I said, there are only 9. The first one, key question 72, you have to define the terms. And then key question 73 is biotic versus abiotic. Now, in defining the terms, there are 9 of them. So the first one is ecology. So if you're doing this, if you're not using the spaces that I provided for you, you can just write it out. But make sure you put the terminology. So don't just put the meaning without writing down which word you're defining. So if you put ecology, you can put the study of the interaction of living things. I won't do all of these. I'll just give you an example here of living things with each other. Okay, the next one is ecosystem. So remember, you can find all of these. We just went over them. We haven't done photosynthesis yet. Or I think, yes, we did. We just touched briefly on it. So yes, you can still do that. Photosynthesis. Consumer we did. Producer we did. And you also have this in your book, the key terms. So there's ecology, ecosystem, food chain, producer, consumer, herbivore, omnivore, carnivore. Okay, so that's in your book. Habitat is there. Biotic component is there. Abiotic component, and then finally ecotone. And then continuing with the key terms that you have in your book, detritus, decomposer, habitat, abiotic, biotic, ecotone, and we have population, community, and biodiversity. So all of these are in your lesson 5 booklet. So you don't need to do a Google search or an internet search to complete these terms. Okay, this one we will do together. So key question 73, it says list 4 biotic. So remember, biotic means living. And 4 abiotic, so non-living factors in, now there's an example here, the first one is freshwater ecosystem, and we have to do one for lake, and then a terrestrial ecosystem, and the one for that one is forest. Okay, and to make it simpler, I have listed biotic and abiotic factors. So plants, animals, fungi, bacteria. Non-living examples: water, sunlight, soil, air, or temperature. So the first one, 73A, abiotic factors. So let's list what can we see or what would be present in a freshwater ecosystem such as a lake. That's abiotic, that's non-living. Well, if it's a lake, my first thought would be water would be there, sunlight, what else would we expect in a freshwater ecosystem? Rocks, okay, and temperature. For biotic, so now living factors that we would expect in an ecosystem such as a lake would be fish, algae, I'd expect to see plants, okay, and bacteria. Okay, in a terrestrial ecosystem, and in this case, forest, so what can we expect as the non-living factors in a forest? Rocks, okay, this we see, garbage, okay, that's non-living, air, and temperature. Now in the forest, biotic, instead of naming out all the different animals, we can just name them as one group, animals, or insects. You know, instead of putting moose, deer, birds. So we have animals, insects, plants would be present in the forest. And what else can we put in there? We can put fungi, okay, in the forest. Okay, so that's key question 73. So remember, you just have to determine the different factors, whether it's abiotic or biotic. And if you're not sure, go to your book. There's a list there on page 3. If you're not sure where to find the answers. Next up is the energy in ecosystems. So the sun is the source of all energy in an ecosystem. It gives us light and also warms the surface of our planet. It acts as a giant nuclear reactor, causing evaporation of water, thereby making photosynthesis possible. So photosynthesis is the process by which green plants use sunlight energy to produce sugars. So ecosystems rely on energy. The amount of energy available in an ecosystem, that's what determines how many organisms can live in that ecosystem. So if you look at this path or chart, you can see you have solar energy, okay, which is the sun. Now it transfers energy to primary producers. In this case, let's say the plant leaves, which then transfers the energy to primary consumers. So it could be the herbivores, which is a slug. That's the example here. Then that transfers of energy to secondary consumers, which is a thrush or a bird. And then transfers the energy to the top carnivore, which is the hawk. So you can look at the food chain. You have the sun, where it gives you energy, which provides it to the plants, and then from the plant you get the slug who eats the plants, then you have the bird who eats the slug, and then you have the hawk who eats the bird. Okay, so the energy is transferred from one trophic level to the next. So what is energy flow in ecosystems? Well, we just looked at that. We said that in almost all ecosystem, it's the sun's energy, but as the energy moves through the ecosystem, much of it is lost at each feeding level as heat. Okay, so here's a better picture of the energy flow. We said energy starts from the sun, and then the energy flows to the producer, which is the plant, then converts it to chemical energy, which is food, and uses energy to grow. The consumers then eat the plant and use the chemical energy to grow and store some of it as chemical energy as well. So what is the percentage of energy transferred from one trophic level to the next? Well, it varies between 5% and 20%. This is what's known as ecological efficiency. So an average figure of 10% is often used. So here's your pyramid of ecological efficiency. 90% of the energy available is lost as energy and is transferred to the next trophic level. The energy is lost as heat, so only 10% is passed on to the next level. So they look at the 10% rule. So here's how they show it here. 100,000 joule of sunlight. So joule is a derived unit of energy. Then 10,000 of it, so you lose 10%. 10,000 goes to wheat. Then 1,000 goes to the grasshopper. 100 goes to the rats, and then 10 goes to the snakes. Okay, photosynthesis is the process by which plants and some bacteria use the energy from sunlight to produce sugar or glucose, which cellular respiration converts into ATP, which is also known as the fuel used by all living things. So the conversion of unusable sunlight energy into usable chemical energy is associated with the actions of the green pigment. And we looked at this in lesson 2, biology. If you remember, what is that green pigment that's found in chloroplast? That's called chlorophyll. So most of the time, photosynthetic process uses water and releases the oxygen that we absolutely must have to stay alive. And of course, we need the food. So we can write the overall chemical reaction of this process as 6H2O plus 6CO2. Remember this from chemistry. The arrow means yields to C6H12O6 plus 6O2. Okay, so that's the overall chemical reaction. Or what we can do is, in a word equation, what we're saying here is water plus carbon dioxide yields glucose plus oxygen. So if you remember your elements, H is hydrogen, O is oxygen. So when you have 6H2O, that's water. Carbon dioxide, so C is carbon, O is oxygen. So CO2 is carbon dioxide, but you need 6 of those. So carbon dioxide, 6CO2 yields C6H12O6, which is the chemical formula for glucose, plus 6O2, which is oxygen. Okay, that's in one of your key questions there. So it's asking you for the overall chemical reaction of photosynthesis. So you can try this. This is one of your support questions. It gives you the terms on the left-hand side, or column A, and then the description is in column B. So the words are abiotic, artificial, biodiversity, biome, biotic, carnivore, community, consumer, decomposer, detritus, herbivore, natural, omnivore, and population. I think there's 14 there. No, last one is producer, so 15. So you don't have to submit this to me because you have this, you have the answer at the end of the lesson. So if you remember right off the bat, B, the non-living components of an ecosystem. So the answer to that would be, so 1, abiotic is B, which is the non-living components of an ecosystem. And then of course you know biotic, which is the living components of an ecosystem, and that's I. Let's see some of the ones that you may know. Organism that eats only meat. So is that a number 6, carnivore? So that would be K. Organisms that eat plants and animals, that would be 11, herbivore. So H. Okay, and so on. So try this and then look to see if you have it right. And if you already know that some of these terms are in your key question 72, remember key question 72, you have to define the terms. Well, the word, any of these in there? Producer is there. Okay, number 15. Abiotic and biotic components are also there. So you can use this, the column B descriptions to complete your work. Not all of them are there, but some of them are in that support question. Okay, when we come back on Monday, we're going to look at the change and stability in ecosystems. So that is on that's on page 10. So specifically we're looking at how do human activities affect the ecosystem. So the place where we live, whether or the areas in our environment, whether it's lake, forest, and so on. Okay, so that's all we're going to do for today. I will talk to you again on Monday. If you have any questions, make sure you let me know so that I can help you with completing your key questions for PLAR Geography. Miigwech.